My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 31, and this is the first time I've brought anyone to meet my parents. Mom, Dad, this is Claire. I set flowers on their headstone. She's the woman I'm going to marry. Claire squeezes my hand. How did they? 15 years ago, a woman named Madeline Roberts convinced my father to sign power of attorney papers. Said she was helping with business loans. My voice gets quieter. Within 6 months, our savings, our house, even our Medicare benefits, everything was gone. That's horrible. My parents couldn't live with the shame. They died by suicide in our garage, leaving me a note that said, "We're sorry. Please forgive us." I was 15, watching police cars fill our driveway. Claire's eyes fill with tears. Where is she now? This Madeline woman? I turned to face her. That's what I need to tell you. Last Sunday, when I met your mother for dinner. When she introduced herself, I take a breath. Claire, your mother is Madeline Roberts. That's impossible. My mom saved me. She's protected me my whole life. From what? From people who might steal from me. I almost laugh, but it comes out bitter. Claire, she didn't protect you. She's been stealing from you for 16 years. Your social security checks, your inheritance, everything. You're lying. Your trust fund is gone. The money your biological parents left you? She's been taking it all. But she loves me. I look at my parents' graves, then back at her. That's exactly what my father thought. What happens when the woman who destroyed your family has spent 16 years destroying the woman you love? If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get started. The Miller house sat on Maple Street like a picture frame around a family that was slowly falling apart. 15-year-old Ethan pressed his face against the living room window, watching his father's car pull into the driveway at 9:30. Again, David Miller used to come home at 6. He used to ask about homework and laugh at dinner. That was before Madeline started working at his office. Before the phone calls that made him step outside. Before the tired look that never left his eyes. Ethan's mother sat at the kitchen table, organizing her weekly pills into the small plastic compartments. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, as if the routine could hold everything together. The house smelled like vanilla candles and something else. Something that felt like worry. Where's Dad? Ethan asked, sliding into the chair beside her. He's coming, she said, not looking up. He's always coming. The front door opened with a soft click. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, loosening his blue tie. His shirt was wrinkled. His hair looked like he'd run his hands through it too many times. Sorry I'm late. His voice was quiet, careful. The presentation ran long. Ethan's mother nodded. She didn't ask which presentation. She stopped asking questions weeks ago. David sat down and reached for the mail stack. Bills, mostly. A red envelope from the mortgage company sat on top. David's jaw tightened as he flipped through everything quickly, setting each piece aside without really reading. The phone rang. David's hand froze over a credit card statement. The phone rang again. Once more. I'll get it, David said, standing. It's 9:40 at night, Ethan's mother said. David was already walking toward the sliding door that led to the back patio. He answered on the 4th ring. Hello? His voice dropped to a whisper. No, not right now. I'll handle it. Ethan could see his father through the glass door. David paced back and forth, one hand pressed against his forehead. His mouth moved quickly, forming words Ethan couldn't hear. Who calls this late? Ethan asked. His mother's hand stilled over the pill organizer. Work, she said. Always work. But Ethan knew it wasn't work. Work didn't make grown men hide on patios. Work didn't make fathers forget to ask about school or notice dinner getting cold. David came back inside 5 minutes later. His face looked pale under the kitchen lights. Everything okay? Ethan's mother asked. Fine. David sat back down. Just some account details. Nothing serious. They ate leftover roast beef in silence. The only sounds were forks against plates and the hum of the refrigerator. Ethan watched his parents avoid each other's eyes, speaking only to ask for salt or comment on the weather. After dinner, David disappeared into his home office. The door clicked shut. Through the thin walls, Ethan could hear the printer running. Papers shuffling. The quiet sound of his father's voice making another phone call. Later that night, Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house felt different now. Smaller. like the walls were pressing closer together. Footsteps moved through the hallway. His father's voice drifted through the darkness. "I know what I signed," David was saying. "Yes, I understand the terms." Ethan crept to his bedroom door and opened it just wide enough to see down the hallway. His father stood in the living room, holding a cordless phone. Papers were spread across the coffee table. "Madeline, I trust you," David said. "If you say this protects my family, then I believe you." Madeline, the name that had been appearing in conversations for the past 2 months. Madeline who worked late. Madeline who understood complicated numbers. Madeline who smiled too much when she called. Ethan watched his father lean over the coffee table. He picked up a pen. He signed something. The signature looked quick, careless. Like he wasn't really reading what he was writing his name on. "Done," David said into the phone. "Are we good now?" There was a long pause. "I know," David continued, his voice softer. "I know this is difficult for everyone." Another pause. "Yes, I'll see you tomorrow." David hung up and stood there for a moment, staring at the papers on the table. His shoulders sagged. He looked older than 45. He looked like a man who was carrying something heavy and couldn't put it down. Ethan closed his door quietly and climbed back into bed. His stomach felt twisted, like when he was little and knew he was going to throw up. But this wasn't sickness. This was something worse. This was the feeling of watching something precious break apart slowly, piece by piece, and not knowing how to stop it. Outside, a car drove down Maple Street. Its headlights swept across Ethan's bedroom wall and disappeared. The house settled into its nighttime sounds. The heater kicked on. The old wood floors creaked. But underneath all of that, Ethan could hear something new. Something that sounded like endings. The next morning, Ethan found one of the papers his father had signed lying on the kitchen counter. It was folded in half, partially hidden under the newspaper. The letterhead read, "Financial Power of Attorney, Limited Authorization." Ethan didn't understand all the words. But he understood enough. His father was giving someone else control. Someone named Madeline Roberts. 3 weeks later, the late-night phone calls became routine. David would finish dinner, wait exactly 15 minutes, then step outside to the patio. The conversations lasted longer each time. Sometimes 20 minutes. Sometimes half an hour. Ethan learned to recognize the pattern. First, his father's voice would be careful, professional. Then it would soften, become almost pleading. By the end, David would be saying things like, "I understand," and, "You're right, of course." Madeline Roberts had become the most important person in their house, even though she'd never actually been inside it. "She says the quarterly reports are more complicated than we thought," David explained one evening. He was spreading documents across the dining room table, sorting them into careful piles. "There are compliance issues, tax implications." Ethan's mother stood in the doorway, holding a cup of tea. "Since when do you bring work home?" "Since the numbers stopped making sense," David said, not looking up. "Maybe we should hire a different accountant." David's hand stilled over the papers. "Madeline isn't just an accountant. She's my assistant. She knows the company inside and out." "Your assistant." The words hung in the air between them. When did assistants start calling at 10 o'clock? When companies started failing, David snapped. Then he looked up, his expression softening. "I'm sorry. This is just. It's a lot of pressure right now." Ethan watched from the kitchen doorway. His mother's face had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that meant she was thinking things she couldn't say out loud. The next morning, Ethan found a new bank statement on the counter. Not their usual Wells Fargo envelope, but something from First National. The account number was different. The balance was different too. His father walked into the kitchen, already dressed for work. "Dad?" Ethan held up the statement. "What's this account?" David took the paper quickly, folding it in half. "Just a temporary thing. Until we sort out some cash flow issues." "Cash flow issues?" "Nothing serious." David poured coffee into his travel mug. "Sometimes businesses need to move money around. Keep things separate for a while." But Ethan had heard that tone before. It was the same voice his father used when he said everything was fine, right before something turned out to be very not fine. That afternoon, Ethan's mother called him into the living room. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, holding a thick envelope. "Look at this," she said, handing him a Medicare explanation of benefits form. "It says I received physical therapy sessions last month. 3 times a week for 2 weeks. Ethan scanned the document. But you didn't have physical therapy. No, I didn't. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. Someone used my Medicare number. Someone scheduled appointments and billed the government for services I never received. Who would do that? I don't know. She took the paper back, folding it carefully. But I'm going to find out. She called Medicare that evening. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. Ethan could hear her voice from his bedroom, growing more frustrated as she was transferred from department to department. No, I did not authorize any physical therapy. No, I do not have mobility issues. No, I have never been to that clinic. When she hung up, the house was very quiet. David came home at 10:15 that night. Ethan's mother was waiting for him at the kitchen table, the Medicare form spread in front of her. We need to talk, she said. David loosened his tie and sat down across from her. He looked at the paperwork, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or guilt. Where did you get this? He asked. It came in the mail. Like it always does. Her voice was calm, controlled. David, someone is using my Medicare information. Someone is committing fraud with my name. David stared at the form for a long time. I can explain. Then explain. The company is in trouble. Real trouble. We needed temporary funding while we restructured some accounts. What does that have to do with my Medicare? David's shoulders sagged. Madeline found some creative solutions, ways to generate cash flow while we waited for the bank loans to process. The words fell between them like stones. Creative solutions. Ethan's mother repeated the phrase slowly. You mean fraud. I mean survival. You mean crime. David stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. You don't understand business. Sometimes you have to bend rules to save jobs. To save families. Whose family are you saving, David? The question hung in the air. David walked to the window, staring out at their backyard. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. She loves me, he said finally. Madeline. She loves me, and she's trying to help. Ethan's mother didn't move, didn't speak. She just sat there, absorbing the words like they were physical blows. And us? She asked quietly. What about us? David turned around. His face looked hollow, exhausted. I love you too. I love this family. That's why I'm doing this. You're doing this because you're having an affair. The truth sat between them now, clear and undeniable. Yes, David said. I'm having an affair. But that doesn't change the fact that the business is failing. That doesn't change the fact that if I don't find money somewhere, we're going to lose everything. So you decided to steal. I decided to survive. Ethan's mother stood up slowly, gathering the Medicare papers. How long? How long what? How long have you been stealing from Medicare? How long have you been forging my signatures? How long have you been lying to my face? David was quiet for a long moment. 6 months. 6 months. She nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. And how much? About $12,000. $12,000. She walked toward the stairs, then stopped. And Madeline? How long has that been going on? 8 months. Ethan's mother climbed the stairs without saying another word. A few minutes later, Ethan heard the guest bedroom door close. David stood in the empty kitchen for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and stepped outside. Ethan crept to the window and watched his father pace back and forth on the patio. Even through the glass, he could see his father's mouth forming words like, sorry, and mistake, and fix this. But some things, Ethan was beginning to understand, couldn't be fixed with apologies and promises. Some things, once broken, stayed broken. The next morning, David's car wasn't in the driveway. The coffee pot was cold. A note on the kitchen table said, had to go to the office early. We'll call later. He didn't call. By evening, when the second mortgage notice arrived in the mail, Ethan realized his father might not be coming back at all. David came back 3 days later. But he wasn't really back. Not the way that mattered. He moved through the house like a ghost, appearing for meals and disappearing into his office. The phone calls to Madeline stopped completely. Now when the phone rang, it was always someone asking for money. Mr. Miller, this is regarding your overdue payment. Sir, we need to discuss your account status. Mr. Miller, we're required to inform you that foreclosure proceedings. David would let them go to voicemail. All of them. The red envelopes multiplied on the kitchen counter. Past due notices from the electric company. Final notice from the gas company. The mortgage company sent a thick packet with words like default and legal action stamped across the front. Ethan's mother stopped organizing her pills into weekly containers. Instead, she sat at the dining room table with old receipts and bank statements, trying to make sense of numbers that no longer added up. How much? She asked one morning, holding up a credit card bill. David was pouring coffee, not meeting her eyes. 14,000. And the mortgage? 3 months behind. The equity line? Maxed out. She set down the bill carefully. Where did it all go, David? David's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. The business needed capital. Madeline said she could help us restructure. Where is she now? Gone. The word hit the kitchen like a physical blow. Gone. Not on vacation. Not temporarily relocated. Gone, the way people disappear when they've taken what they came for. She took the money, Ethan's mother said. It wasn't a question. She had legitimate business expenses. Travel costs. Consulting fees. She took the money, David. David sat down heavily at the table. His face looked gray, deflated. Yes, she took the money. Ethan watched from the doorway as his father buried his head in his hands. His shoulders shook, but no sound came out. How much? His mother asked. Everything. The word echoed in the quiet kitchen. Everything. Their savings. The business accounts. The emergency fund. The money they'd been saving for Ethan's college. The retirement account David had been building for 20 years. I tried to get it back, David continued, his voice muffled. I called her. I went to her apartment. The landlord said she moved out 2 weeks ago. Left no forwarding address. 2 weeks ago. Ethan's mother's voice was very quiet. You've known for 2 weeks that she's gone. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I could just restructure the loans, maybe sell some of the equipment. David, look at me. He lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, hollow. You can't fix this, she said. This isn't something you can fix with phone calls and promises. This is criminal fraud, identity theft, embezzlement. I know. And you're complicit. I know. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences. This one felt final, like a door closing that would never open again. 3 weeks later, the foreclosure notice was posted on their front door. Bright yellow paper with official seals and legal language that meant you have 30 days to leave. Ethan watched the neighbors drive by slowly, reading the notice. Some of them looked sympathetic. Others looked relieved that it wasn't happening to them. Mrs. Peterson from next door brought over a casserole and a sad smile. If there's anything we can do. But there wasn't anything anyone could do. The house that had been their home for 12 years now belonged to the bank. The cars would be repossessed. The furniture would be sold to pay creditors. David stopped leaving the house. He sat in his office chair, staring at the empty computer screen. Sometimes Ethan could hear him making phone calls, his voice desperate and pleading. Please, I just need an extension. 1 month. 2 weeks. Anything. But desperate men who'd already lost everything don't get extensions. Ethan's mother stopped sleeping. She wandered the house at night, touching things. The kitchen table where they used to do homework. The living room couch where they watched movies. The family photos on the mantelpiece. I should have seen it coming, she whispered one night, thinking she was alone. I should have protected us. But how do you protect against someone you love? How do you guard against the person who's supposed to be guarding you? The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Ethan found his mother sitting on the bathroom floor, holding an empty bottle of sleeping pills. She wasn't unconscious. She was just sitting there, staring at the bottle, like she was trying to decide something important. Mom? She looked up at him with eyes that seemed very far away. I'm tired, honey. I'm just so tired. Ethan sat down beside her on the cold tile floor. We'll figure it out. Dad will figure it out. No, he won't. Her voice was matter of fact, not angry. Just exhausted. He can't figure it out because there's nothing left to figure. It's all gone. They sat there together in the small bathroom, listening to the house settle around them. Outside, a lawnmower started up. Normal people doing normal things on a normal Tuesday. What happens to us now? Ethan asked. His mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I don't know. 5 days later, Ethan woke up to sirens. The ambulance came first. Then the police. Then the coroner's van that moved very slowly, like there was no rush anymore. His parents had died together, in their sleep, from carbon monoxide poisoning. The car was running in the closed garage. The note they left was brief and neat: "We're sorry. We love you. Please forgive us, Mrs." Peterson held Ethan on her porch while official people moved through his house, documenting what was left of his family's life. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, speaking in low voices about tragedy and shame and the Millers who seemed so normal just a few months ago. At the funeral, people said things like, "They're at peace now," and "at least they're together." But Ethan heard other whispers too. About fraud and affairs and families that destroy themselves from the inside. "He ruined his own family," someone said behind him at the graveside service. "That man chose another woman over his wife and son." Ethan turned around to see who had spoken, but all he saw were faces looking down at their hands, pretending they hadn't said anything at all. After the service, Ethan went to live with his aunt in Chicago. The house on Maple Street was sold at auction to pay creditors. The furniture was divided between second-hand stores and charity organizations. But the shame came with him. The weight of carrying a name that meant failure and betrayal and families that can't survive love mixed with greed. That night, in his aunt's spare bedroom, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. He wasn't thinking about his parents' faces or the sound of ambulance sirens or the empty house on Maple Street. He was thinking about a woman named Madeline Roberts. About how she'd smiled when she convinced his father to sign papers. About how she'd disappeared with their entire life savings. About how she was somewhere out there, probably laughing. Probably spending their money, probably looking for the next desperate man who would trust her with everything. And Ethan made himself a promise in that dark bedroom. Someday, somehow, he would find her. 15 years later, Chicago felt like home in the way that replacement things sometimes do. Functional. Comfortable, not quite the same as the original, but good enough to build a life around. Ethan Miller worked on the 37th floor of the Willis Tower, in an office with windows that looked out over Lake Michigan. Senior financial analyst for Midwest Asset Protection Services. The title sounded important, and the work was exactly what it claimed to be: protecting people's money from the kinds of people who had destroyed his family. Every day, Ethan reviewed cases of financial elder abuse, Medicare fraud, investment scams, predatory lending schemes, romance fraudsters who convinced lonely seniors to wire their life savings to fake emergencies. The paperwork told the same story over and over again. Trusting people, smooth-talking criminals, signatures on documents that transferred everything from the victim to the victimizer. Another grandmother in Naperville, his colleague Janet said, dropping a thick file on his desk. Lost $60,000 to a phone scam. Guy convinced her she was helping her grandson pay bail money. Ethan opened the file. Patricia Williams, age 73. Widow, Social Security and a small pension. Until last month, she'd had $60,000 in savings from her late husband's life insurance. Now she had nothing. The scammer's name was listed as Michael Torres. But Ethan knew that probably wasn't his real name. These people always used fake names. Fake addresses. Fake stories about grandchildren in trouble or IRS agents demanding immediate payment or lottery winnings that required processing fees. Real names were for honest people. Ethan had learned to read between the lines of these fraud reports. The victims always blamed themselves. They always said things like, "I should have known better," or, "It seemed too good to be true." They carried shame the way his parents had carried shame. Like it was something heavy they'd swallowed and couldn't throw up. But shame belonged to the criminals, not the victims. The people who built elaborate lies to steal from others. The people who targeted the elderly and the lonely and the desperate. People like Madeline Roberts. Ethan kept her name on a piece of paper in his wallet. Not because he needed to remember it, he would never forget it, but because having it written down made her real. Kept her from becoming just another painful memory that might fade with time. Every few months, he would run her name through various database searches. Credit reports, criminal background checks, property records, social media platforms, but Madeline Roberts had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Which probably meant Madeline Roberts wasn't her real name either. That afternoon, Ethan had lunch with his friend Kevin from law school. They met at a sandwich shop near Grant Park, the same place they'd been meeting for the past 3 years. "You're looking good," Kevin said, studying Ethan across the small table. Settled, like you've figured some things out. Ethan smiled. Thanks. I guess 31 feels different than 25 did. You seeing anyone? Actually, yes. The words surprised Ethan as he said them. Met her a few weeks ago. Her name's Claire. Tell me about her. Ethan found himself smiling wider. She's a nursing aide, works with seniors, very kind, very careful with money. Careful with money is good. Yeah, she clips coupons, checks her bank balance twice a week, reads all the fine print before she signs anything. Kevin laughed. Sounds like she'd fit right into your line of work. Actually, I haven't told her what I do yet. I just said I work in finance. Why not? Ethan was quiet for a moment. How do you explain that talking about financial crimes feels like opening old wounds? How do you tell someone that every fraud case you investigate reminds you of your own family's destruction? It's complicated, he said finally. Most good things are. That evening, Ethan sat in his apartment reading through another elder abuse case. Dorothy Chen, age 68. Her financial advisor had convinced her to invest her retirement savings in a real estate scheme that turned out to be completely fictitious. The advisor's name was listed as Jennifer Walsh. But when Ethan looked at the photo, the victim had provided a snapshot taken at a coffee shop where they'd discussed the investment opportunity. Something about the woman's face looked familiar. Not exactly familiar, but close. Like seeing someone's sister or cousin. Someone who shared features with a person you used to know. Ethan stared at the photo for a long time. Jennifer Walsh was blonde now, not brunette. She looked older. Different haircut. Different style of dress. But the smile was the same. That warm, trustworthy smile that made people want to sign papers and hand over their life savings. Ethan opened his laptop and searched for the original police reports from his parents' case. He'd requested copies years ago when he'd first started working in fraud investigation. The files were stored on his hard drive, in a folder he rarely opened. He found the photo of Madeline Roberts that had been taken from David's office security camera. 15 years old now, grainy black and white, but clear enough to see her face. Ethan held the printed photo next to his laptop screen, comparing Madeline Roberts to Jennifer Walsh. Different hair, different age, different clothes, different name, same person. His hands were shaking as he reached for his phone. He called the Chicago Police Department Fraud Division and asked for Detective Maria Santos, the investigator assigned to Dorothy Chen's case. Detective Santos, this is Ethan Miller from Midwest Asset Protection Services. I'm calling about the Chen case. Jennifer Walsh. What about it? I think Jennifer Walsh is actually a woman named Madeline Roberts. I think she's been running financial scams for at least 15 years. Can you prove that? Ethan looked at the two photos side by side on his desk. 15 years apart. Different names. Same predatory smile. I'm working on it, he said. How long do you need? Give me a week. Ethan hung up and stared at the photos until his eyes burned. After 15 years of searching databases and running background checks and hoping for some trace of the woman who'd destroyed his family. She'd appeared in a routine fraud case on his desk. She hadn't disappeared. She'd just moved on to the next victim. But this time, she'd picked the wrong target. This time, her victim had reported the crime. This time, there were investigators and evidence and a paper trail that could be followed. This time, Ethan thought, justice might actually be possible. He picked up his phone again and called Claire. Hey, she said, sounding happy to hear from him. How was your day? Interesting, Ethan said, looking at the photos on his desk. Really interesting. What are you doing tomorrow night? I'd love to take you to dinner. That sounds perfect. Great. There's something I want to tell you about my work. About what I do. I'd love to hear about it. After he hung up, Ethan sat in his apartment and thought about timing. About how some things take 15 years to circle back around. About how justice isn't always fast, but sometimes it's patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment. Tomorrow, he would tell Claire about financial crimes and elder abuse and the woman who'd destroyed his family when he was 15. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, Ethan Miller went to bed believing that Madeline Roberts was going to pay for what she'd done. The next evening, Ethan met Claire at Romano's, a small Italian restaurant near her apartment. She arrived exactly on time, wearing a blue dress that brought out her eyes. and a nervous smile that made him want to protect her from everything difficult in the world. "You look beautiful," he said, standing to pull out her chair. "Thank you." She sat down carefully, smoothing her dress. "I've been looking forward to this all day." They ordered wine and talked about small things. Her shift at the nursing home. His commute downtown. The weather forecast for the weekend. Normal conversation between two people who were still learning each other's rhythms. But underneath the pleasant dinner conversation, Ethan was trying to figure out how to explain his work without explaining his past. How to talk about financial crimes without mentioning the crime that had shaped his entire adult life. "So," Claire said, cutting her chicken parmesan into precise small pieces. "You said you wanted to tell me about your job." "I work in fraud investigation," Ethan said. "Specifically financial elder abuse. I help build cases against people who steal from seniors." Claire's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "That's terrible. I mean, terrible that it happens. Not terrible that you stop it. It happens more than people realize. Billions of dollars every year." "What kinds of scams?" Ethan found himself relaxing as he explained. "Investment fraud, Medicare billing schemes, romance scams, family members who manipulate elderly relatives into signing over power of attorney. The victims are usually isolated," he continued. "Widowed, maybe dealing with some cognitive decline. The criminals target people who are vulnerable and trusting. Like the residents where I work." Claire's voice was quiet. "Some of them talk about phone calls from grandchildren asking for money. Or people who promise to help them get bigger social security checks." "Exactly. And the worst part is, the victims usually blame themselves. They're embarrassed, ashamed, so they don't report the crimes." Claire was looking at him intently now. "Is that why you do this work? Because you care about protecting people?" Ethan hesitated. "Partly, and partly because." He took a breath. "Because someone stole from my family when I was younger. Everything we had. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But it taught me how these criminals operate. How they build trust and then exploit it." Claire reached across the table and touched his hand. "That must have been awful." "It was. But it led me to work that matters. So maybe something good came out of it." They finished dinner and walked slowly back toward Claire's apartment. The evening was warm, with a soft breeze that carried the scent of blooming trees from the park across the street. "There's something I should tell you too," Claire said as they reached her building. "About my family situation." "Okay. I was adopted when I was 12. My mother. She's very protective, sometimes too protective." Ethan waited for her to continue. "She handles all my financial paperwork. Bank statements, tax forms, insurance claims. She says it's because I'm too trusting, too likely to make mistakes." Something cold moved through Ethan's chest. "How long has she been doing that?" "Since I turned 18. She said adults need to be careful with money, especially young women. That there are people out there who look for ways to take advantage." The words were familiar. Too familiar. Like an echo of conversations Ethan had heard 15 years ago. "Claire," he said carefully, "do you think that's normal? For someone else to handle all your finances?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what's normal. I only have one family to compare to." They stood together on the sidewalk outside her apartment building. The porch light cast long shadows across her face. "Would you like to meet her?" Claire asked suddenly. "My mother? She's been asking about you." Ethan's heart began beating faster. "When? This weekend, maybe? She's making Sunday dinner. She always makes too much food anyway." "I'd like that," Ethan said, though every instinct he'd developed over 15 years of fraud investigation was telling him to be careful. "What's her name?" "Madeline," Claire said, smiling. "Madeline Roberts." The world stopped. Ethan heard the words, but they seemed to be coming from very far away. Madeline Roberts. The woman who'd destroyed his family. The woman he'd been hunting for 15 years. The woman whose photo was sitting on his desk right now, next to Jennifer Walsh's picture. "Ethan?" Claire was looking at him with concern. "Are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," he managed to say. "Just tired. It's been a long week." But he wasn't fine. He was standing on a sidewalk in Chicago, holding hands with the daughter of the woman who'd killed his parents. The adopted daughter. Which meant she probably didn't know. Probably had no idea what kind of person had raised her. "Sunday sounds perfect," he heard himself saying. "I'll bring something. Wine, maybe. She'll love that." She loves entertaining. Claire kissed him goodnight, a soft, sweet kiss that tasted like the future they'd been planning together. Then she disappeared into her building, leaving Ethan alone under the streetlights. He stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. The odds were astronomical. In a city of 3 million people, how do you accidentally fall in love with the daughter of your family's destroyer? Unless it wasn't an accident. Ethan thought about Claire's careful money habits. Her nervousness around financial paperwork. The way she'd described her mother as protective. The way she'd mentioned that Madeline handled all her finances. What if Claire wasn't just an innocent daughter? What if she was another victim? His phone buzzed with a text message from Claire. "Thank you for tonight. Can't wait for you to meet Mom. Sweet dreams." Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, "Sweet dreams. See you Sunday." But Ethan knew he wouldn't be sleeping tonight. He had planning to do. Research to conduct. Evidence to gather. Because on Sunday, he was going to walk into Madeline Roberts's house and sit at her dinner table and pretend to be nothing more than her daughter's boyfriend. And then, very carefully, very quietly, he was going to destroy her the same way she'd destroyed his family 15 years ago. Justice, Ethan thought as he walked back to his car, sometimes takes a very long time to arrive. But when it comes, it's worth the wait. Sunday arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Chicago weather that makes everything feel heavier than it should. Ethan stood outside Madeline Roberts's house at exactly 6 o'clock, holding a bottle of wine and trying to keep his hands from shaking. The house was nice. Not extravagant, but comfortable. A 2-story colonial in Lincoln Park with a well-maintained garden and fresh paint on the shutters. The kind of home that suggested financial stability without drawing attention. The perfect cover for someone who made her living stealing from others. Ethan rang the doorbell. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. For 15 years, he'd imagined this moment. What he would say, what he would do, how it would feel to finally face the woman who'd destroyed his family. But he'd never imagined this. Standing on a front porch, holding wine, pretending to be someone's boyfriend while the woman who'd killed his parents smiled warmly and invited him in for dinner. "You must be Ethan," Madeline said, opening the door wider. "Claire's told me so much about you." She was older now, 57, maybe 58. Gray streaks in her brown hair. Lines around her eyes. But the smile was exactly the same. Warm, trustworthy. The kind of smile that made people want to sign papers and hand over their life savings. "Mrs. Roberts," Ethan said, extending the wine. "Thank you for having me. Please, call me Madeline. And thank you for the wine. Claire's in the kitchen finishing dinner." Come in, come in." Ethan stepped into the front hallway. The house smelled like roast beef and vanilla candles. Family photos lined the walls. Madeline and Claire at various ages. Vacation pictures. Holiday gatherings. A lifetime of memories that looked perfectly normal. "Beautiful home," Ethan said. "Thank you. We've been here 8 years now. Claire was 20 when we moved in. Hard to believe she's all grown up and bringing home handsome men for dinner." They walked into the living room. Tasteful furniture. Hardwood floors. A piano in the corner that looked well used. Everything carefully arranged to suggest a family that belonged here. "So Claire tells me you work in finance," Madeline said, settling into an armchair. "That must be interesting work." "It has its moments." Ethan sat on the couch across from her, studying her face. Looking for some sign of recognition. Some indication that she remembered David Miller and the family she'd destroyed 15 years ago. But there was nothing. No flicker of recognition. No moment of unease. She looked at him like he was just another young man dating her daughter. Which meant either she didn't remember, or she was an even better actress than he'd imagined. "What kind of finance?" Madeline asked. "Investment management? Banking? Fraud investigation, actually. I help people who've been victims of financial crimes." For just a moment, something shifted in Madeline's expression. A micro-expression that lasted less than a second. Wariness, maybe. Or calculation. "How noble," she said, her smile returning to full brightness. "There are so many terrible people out there, aren't there? Taking advantage of others. It's good that someone's protecting the innocent." Before Ethan could respond, Claire appeared in the doorway wearing an apron and looking flustered. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. "Mom, can you help me with the wine?" "Of course, darling." Madeline stood and followed Claire toward the kitchen. Ethan heard them talking in low voices, but couldn't make out the words. He used the opportunity to look around the living room more carefully. The photos on the side tables. The books on the shelves. The small personal items that revealed how people actually lived. On the mantelpiece, he found what he was looking for. A small silver frame containing a photo of Madeline with a man Ethan didn't recognize. They were standing in front of what looked like a government building. Both were dressed formally. Both were smiling. But it wasn't their smiles that made Ethan's heart race. It was the building behind them. The Cook County Courthouse. The same building where marriage licenses were issued. Where adoptions were finalized. Where legal documents were signed that gave one person control over another person's life. That's from when we finalized the adoption, Claire said behind him. Ethan turned around. Claire was carrying a serving bowl, but her eyes were on the photo. You were 12? He asked. Yes. Scared out of my mind, but Mom made everything feel safe. What happened to your biological parents? Claire set down the serving bowl. Car accident. I was in foster care for about a year before Mom found me. Must have been difficult. Mom says I don't remember much from before. Trauma, you know? Sometimes our minds protect us by forgetting. But Ethan was thinking about something else. About adoption records and legal guardianships and how easy it would be for someone with Madeline's skills to manipulate the system. To find a vulnerable child and position herself as the savior. Claire, he said carefully, do you remember choosing to be adopted? Or was it something that was decided for you? Claire looked confused. I was 12. I didn't really have a choice. Mom says she chose me because she could see I needed someone who would take care of the important things. Like paperwork and financial decisions. And she's been taking care of those things ever since? Well, yes. She's good with numbers. Better than I am. Madeline appeared in the doorway. What are we talking about? Just telling Ethan about the adoption, Claire said. How lucky I was that you found me. I was the lucky one, Madeline said, but her eyes were on Ethan. Not everyone gets a daughter as sweet and trusting as Claire. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Sweet and trusting. The same words Madeline had probably used to describe his father to her friends. The same qualities she looked for in all her victims. Dinner's ready, Madeline announced. They moved to the dining room. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans. A family meal that looked exactly like thousands of other family meals happening all over Chicago that night. Except this wasn't a family. This was a predator and her long-term victim, sitting across the table from the son of her previous victims. So Ethan, Madeline said, cutting her meat into precise small pieces, Claire tells me you're very responsible with money. I try to be. It's so important, isn't it? Especially for young couples. So many people get into trouble because they don't understand financial planning. Ethan looked at Claire. Do you handle your own finances, Claire? Claire glanced at her mother. Mom handles most of it. She's much better at keeping track of everything. Everything? Ethan asked. Bank accounts, insurance papers, tax forms, Madeline said smoothly. Claire works so hard at the nursing home, I like to take care of the tedious paperwork. That's very generous. It's what mothers do. After dinner, Claire went upstairs to get photo albums she wanted to show Ethan. Madeline began clearing dishes, and Ethan offered to help. In the kitchen, washing dishes side by side, Madeline finally dropped her motherly facade. You ask a lot of questions, she said quietly, not looking at him. Do I? About Claire's finances. About the adoption. About our family. Ethan dried a plate carefully. I care about her. I'm sure you do. But caring and protecting are different things. She handed him another plate. Their fingers touched briefly. Claire needs someone who understands that some people aren't equipped to handle complicated decisions, Madeline continued. Someone who won't try to change arrangements that work perfectly well. Ethan met her eyes. What kind of arrangements? The kind that keep everyone safe. There it was. The threat, wrapped in concern. The same tone she'd probably used with his father. The same implication that resistance would lead to consequences. Of course, Ethan said. Safety is the most important thing. Madeline smiled. I'm so glad you understand. But as Ethan dried the dishes and listened to Claire moving around upstairs, he was already planning his next moves. Bank records to request. adoption files to review, financial patterns to trace. Because Claire might not remember her life before Madeline, but somewhere in the legal system, there would be documentation. Evidence of how a 12-year-old girl had ended up in the care of a woman who specialized in stealing from the vulnerable. And this time, Ethan thought, he had something Madeline didn't know he had. Time to build a case. Time to gather evidence. Time to save Claire before she ended up like Dorothy Chen and Patricia Williams and all the other victims who'd trusted the wrong person with their lives. The next morning, Ethan was at his office before sunrise. He pulled every string he had, called in every favor he'd earned over 7 years of fraud investigation. First, he contacted Detective Santos. I need to expedite the Jennifer Walsh investigation. I have new information that connects her to multiple other cases. What kind of information? Historical data. I think she's been operating under different identities for at least 15 years. That's a serious allegation. I have documentation to support it. By 10 o'clock, Ethan had formal permission to access Claire's financial records. By noon, he'd requested her adoption files through the Cook County system. By 3 o'clock, he was sitting across from a federal investigator who specialized in long-term financial predators. Tell me about Madeline Roberts, Agent Patricia Wong said, opening a thick case file. She's been running romance and financial scams since at least 2009. Probably longer. She targets vulnerable people, divorced men, elderly women, isolated seniors. She builds trust, gains access to their finances, then disappears with their money. And you think she adopted a child as part of this pattern? I think she adopted a child to create the perfect cover story. Single mother, raising an orphaned girl. Who's going to suspect someone like that of running financial scams? Agent Wong made notes. What's your relationship to this case? Ethan hesitated. Personal. She destroyed my family when I was 15. I've been looking for her ever since. That's a long time to carry a grudge. It's not a grudge. It's justice. 3 days later, the evidence started coming together like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for 15 years. Claire's adoption records showed irregularities. The social worker who'd handled her case had been investigated for falsifying documents in 12 other adoptions. The foster family she'd been placed with before Madeline had no record of caring for a girl named Claire. But most damning were the financial records. Claire's Social Security benefits from her deceased parents had been redirected to an account controlled by Madeline. Her inheritance from her biological grandparents, almost $40,000, had been invested in real estate deals that existed only on paper. For 16 years, Madeline had been systematically stealing from the child she claimed to love. And Claire had no idea. Agent Wong called Ethan on Thursday afternoon. We have enough for an arrest warrant. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Identity theft. Mail fraud. Money laundering. When? Tomorrow morning. But I need to ask you something first. Are you planning to warn Claire? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. She deserves to know. She'll know soon enough. But if you tip her off, if Madeline gets suspicious and runs again, we might not get another chance. She won't run. She thinks she's safe. How can you be sure? Because she thinks I'm just her daughter's boyfriend. She has no idea who I am. That evening, Ethan took Claire to dinner at the same Italian restaurant where they'd eaten the week before. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. Like he was sitting across from a stranger whose entire life was built on lies. You've been quiet this week, Claire said, reaching for his hand across the table. Is everything okay? I've been thinking about us. About our future. That sounds serious. It is serious. Ethan looked at her face, memorizing it. After tomorrow, nothing would be the same. Claire, if you found out that someone you trusted had been lying to you for years, what would you do? What kind of lies? Big ones. Life-changing ones. Claire was quiet for a moment. I guess I'd want to know the truth. Even if it hurt. Even if it meant losing someone you love? Love built on lies isn't really love, is it? The words hung between them like a prophecy. After dinner, they walked through Lincoln Park. The trees were in full bloom now, and the evening air carried the scent of cherry blossoms and the sound of children playing on the distant playground. Claire, Ethan said, stopping beside the pond where ducks were floating in the reflected light of the street lamps. I need to tell you something important. Okay. Tomorrow, some people are going to tell you things about your mother. Things that will be hard to hear. Claire's hand tightened in his. What kind of things? Things about money. Things about the adoption. Things about who she really is. You're scaring me. Ethan turned to face her fully. Your mother is a criminal, Claire. She's been stealing from you for 16 years. She's stolen from other people too. Many other people. Claire pulled her hand away. That's impossible. I know it sounds impossible. But I've seen the evidence. What evidence? Bank records. Legal documents. Financial transactions that show she's been redirecting your benefits and inheritance to accounts she controls. Claire was shaking her head. No, Mom would never. She takes care of me. She protects me. She's been protecting herself, using you as a cover story for her crimes. Why are you saying these things? Ethan took a deep breath. Because 15 years ago, she did the same thing to my family. She convinced my father to trust her, to give her access to our finances. Then she disappeared with everything we had. My parents died because of what she did. Claire stared at him. Your parents killed themselves rather than face bankruptcy and criminal charges for the Medicare fraud she involved them in. The words fell between them like stones in deep water. Claire sat down heavily on a park bench, her face pale in the streetlight. So this whole thing, she said slowly. Our relationship. Was it all just revenge? At first, maybe, but not now. Now I want to save you. From my own mother. From the woman who's been stealing your life one day at a time for 16 years. Claire was quiet for a long time. Around them, the park settled into evening sounds. Dog walkers, joggers, normal people living normal lives that weren't built on decades of lies. What happens tomorrow? She asked finally. Federal agents arrest her. The courts freeze her accounts. Investigators go through every financial transaction she's made in the past 20 years. And then what? And then you get your life back. Claire looked at him with eyes that seemed very far away. What if I don't know how to have a life without her managing everything? Then you learn, one day at a time. They sat together on the bench until the park grew quiet around them. Then Ethan walked her home, knowing it might be the last time they'd walk anywhere together as the people they'd been before the truth changed everything. At her front door, Claire kissed him goodbye. A soft, sad kiss that tasted like endings and beginnings all mixed together. Will you still love me, she asked, when this is all over? I'll love you more, Ethan said. Because you'll finally be free. The next morning, Agent Wong called at 7:30. We have her, she said. Madeline Roberts is in federal custody. The house is being searched. The accounts are frozen. How did Claire take it? She's at the federal building now, giving her statement. She's strong, Ethan. Stronger than you might think. Ethan looked out his apartment window at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, Madeline Roberts was sitting in a holding cell, probably demanding to see a lawyer. Probably insisting that everything she'd done was legal and justified. But the evidence would speak louder than her protests. Bank records, forged documents, a pattern of financial exploitation spanning 2 decades. Justice, Ethan thought, sometimes arrives 15 years late. But when it finally comes, it brings everything with it. 6 months later, Ethan stood in the lobby of the Cook County Federal Courthouse, watching Madeline Roberts walk out in handcuffs. She looked smaller than he remembered. Older. Like someone who'd finally run out of people to manipulate and stories to tell. Their eyes met for just a moment as the marshals led her past. She didn't look angry or defiant. She looked tired, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy secret for too long and was almost relieved to put it down. 3 to 5 years, Agent Wong said beside him. With restitution to all victims. How much restitution? Close to $2 million, spread across 47 victims. Ethan watched the courthouse doors close behind Madeline. Will Claire get her inheritance back? Most of it. The court traced almost $38,000 of the original $40,000. Plus interest. Plus penalties. Outside the courthouse, Claire was waiting by the fountain in Federal Plaza. She'd cut her hair shorter. Changed her style. She looked like someone who was learning to make her own decisions about everything, even small things like haircuts and clothing. How do you feel? Ethan asked, sitting beside her on the edge of the fountain. Free, she said. Terrified, but free. Terrified of what? Everything. Paying my own bills. Making my own mistakes. Living my own life. She smiled. But good terrified, if that makes sense. It did make sense. Ethan remembered feeling the same way when he'd first started working in fraud investigation. The fear that came with taking control of your own story instead of letting it be written by someone else's pain. I've been thinking, Claire said, about the adoption. About what my life was like before. Do you remember more now? Pieces. Little things. I remember having a different name. I remember a grandmother who sent birthday cards. I remember social workers who seemed concerned about something. Want to talk about it? Not yet, but maybe someday. They walked through downtown Chicago together, past the places where they'd had their first date and their first real conversation. The city looked different now. Brighter. Like someone had cleaned windows that Ethan hadn't realized were dirty. I got a new apartment, Claire said. Just a studio, but it's mine. My name on the lease. My utilities in my name. My furniture, even if it's all from Goodwill. I'd love to see it. I'd love to show it to you. But I need to ask you something first. Okay, are you staying with me because you love me, or because you feel responsible for destroying my life? Ethan stopped walking. They were standing in front of the building where he worked, 37 floors above them. Where he spent his days protecting people from the kinds of predators who had shaped both their lives. You think I destroyed your life? You destroyed the only life I knew. Everything I thought was true turned out to be lies. Do you wish I hadn't told you? Claire was quiet for a long time. No, but I need to know that what we have is real. Not just guilt and gratitude mixed up together. Ethan took her hands. When I first met you, I thought you might be part of her scheme. I thought you might know what she was doing. And when did you realize I didn't know? When I saw how frightened you were of making your own financial decisions. When I realized you'd been trained to be helpless. And you fell in love with someone helpless? I fell in love with someone strong enough to rebuild her entire life from scratch when she learned the truth. Claire smiled. A real smile, not the careful smile she'd worn for 16 years while trying to please someone who could never be pleased. I love you too, she said. Not the man who saved me. Just the man who stayed. That evening, they had dinner in Claire's new apartment. Take-out Chinese food eaten on a blanket on the floor because she didn't own a dining table yet. Candles from the dollar store. Wine in coffee mugs because she didn't own wine glasses yet either. But it felt more like home than any place Ethan had lived since he was 15. I've been thinking about my parents, he said, opening the cartons of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken. Want to talk about it? I used to think they were weak. That they chose to give up instead of fighting. And now? Now I think they were just tired. Like Madeline looked today. Tired of carrying shame that belonged to someone else. Claire poured wine into their coffee mugs. Do you still carry their shame? Less than I used to. Ethan looked around the small apartment. I think when you save someone, you save a little piece of yourself too. Is that what we did? Saved each other? That's exactly what we did. Later that night, after Claire had fallen asleep beside him, Ethan lay awake thinking about justice and revenge and the difference between them. He'd spent 15 years wanting to hurt the person who'd hurt his family. But in the end, the justice had come from protecting someone else from the same pain. His phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Wong. Another victim came forward today. Jennifer Walsh scammed her out of $50,000 in 2018. Your case keeps growing. Ethan smiled in the darkness. Every new victim who came forward meant more evidence. More charges. More time in federal prison for Madeline Roberts. But more importantly, it meant more people who would get their money back. More people who would learn they weren't alone. More people who would realize that the shame belonged to the criminals, not the victims. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his aunt in Chicago, saw the news about the arrest. I'm proud of you. Your parents would be proud too. Ethan looked at Claire sleeping peacefully beside him. Her face was relaxed in a way he'd never seen before. Like someone who'd finally stopped waiting for the next crisis. Someone who was learning to trust her own judgment about what was safe and what was dangerous. Outside, Chicago settled into its nighttime rhythms. Traffic lights cycling through their colors. Late shift workers heading home. Early shift workers heading to work. A city full of people living their lives and making their own choices and trusting their own instincts about what mattered. And somewhere in a federal detention center, a woman who'd spent 20 years stealing other people's lives was learning what it felt like to have her choices made by someone else. Life doesn't end just because it breaks once. What falls apart can be the very place where we learn to stand again. If this story gave even a small moment of strength to someone out there, then everything I went through means something today. Sometimes the people who hurt us think they're destroying our future. But what they're really doing is teaching us how strong we can become. How much we can survive. How much love we're capable of building from the pieces they left behind. Claire stirred in her sleep and moved closer to him. In the morning, they would wake up and make their own decisions about what to have for breakfast and how to spend their Saturday and what dreams to chase next. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, Ethan Miller went to sleep believing that justice wasn't something you waited for. It was something you built, one saved life at a time. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe, and share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Your words might become the seed of the next chapter we create together. Thank you for spending this time with me.